Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and we are continuing to walk through the plagues in Egypt. And today, the plague that we're going to be looking at today, it will make your skin crawl, not just because it's gross, but because it actually has to do with your skin. The sixth plague is the plague of boils, so we're going to be looking at that today. The other things we're going to look at as well are very interesting. We're going to look at the fact that the magicians are they're not even trying at this point, which is really, really interesting. The magicians in Egypt. And then finally, of course, taking a look at the Egyptian god or goddess that could be behind this plague as well. So, with that being said, turn with me to Exodus chapter 9. We're going to be looking at verses 8 through 12 today with the sixth plague of boils. All right, so verse 8. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw them in the air in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and become boils breaking out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt." All right, let's take a pause there. So, you have a break in pattern with some of the other plagues. You don't have this audience of Moses, Aaron, and God versus Pharaoh. You don't have that audience here. And this did happen before with the third plague. Now, with the third plague, we kind of theorize that maybe the reason why that pattern is broken is because Pharaoh was acting a little shady, a little deceitful when he said, "Oh, I'll let your people go if you take away the frogs," which was the second plague. But when the frogs did go away, Pharaoh did not let them go. And so, therefore, you have no audience with him whatsoever, and you just have the third plague. Here, it's a little interesting because with the fourth plague, you have that same little act of shadiness and deception, but then you have an audience with the fifth plague, and there is no deception at the end of that one. So it is a little interesting to see the structure of this. For me, I think the big reason why I think that there's no audience, instead it's just the sixth plague, is really, it goes back to verses 6 and 7 of chapter 9 at the end of the fifth plague. "And the next day the Lord did this thing. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one of the livestock of the people of Israel died. And Pharaoh sinned, and behold, not one of the livestock of Israel was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go." So for me, I think what could be happening here is that because Pharaoh didn't just listen to the words of God through Moses and Aaron, when God said, "Look, I'm going to separate you and the Israelites," because of that disbelief, I think it is very, very possible that's why you don't see an audience between God, Moses, Aaron, and then Pharaoh with the sixth plague. I think that would be really, really interesting to look at. Now, of course, the plague itself is awful. Nothing interesting about it when it comes to like, oh, that's interesting. Not with boils. Oh, just if you've had boils, had sores to the point where they're in awful places on the body where it's just awful to move. They bleed, they're sore, it's awful. And so that is what you're supposed to think of when you think of when you see the word boils here. You're supposed to think of that bleeding, that pain, that uncomfortableness. That's what you're supposed to think of. But what's interesting is the fact of how it happened. So in verse 8, it says that the Lord told Moses and Aaron to take handfuls of soot from the kiln. Now, what's interesting is what the kiln would have been used for in ancient Egypt. A lot of scholars believe that that kilns in ancient Egyptian culture would have been used to fire pottery, manufacture different religious artifacts like amulets, jewelry, but then you also would use the kiln to harden mud bricks. And so, for me, I think this is just showing not the humor, but just the personality of God and the fact that he has not gone unaware of what the Egyptians have done to the Israelites while they were in slavery in Egypt. And so the fact that he uses soot from a kiln is not only to say, hey, these artifacts that you use for your ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses, like amulets and jewelry. Not only am I using the soot from that to make you uncomfortable. No, I'm using that same soot that you would make mud bricks from, and most likely the Israelites would have to use in their duty as slaves. I will use that soot to make you uncomfortable, to make you in pain to the point where hopefully you will finally see that I am the only true God. I think that is just remarkable to see. So I think that's really interesting. That's where these boils, that's what God used to bring about the boils. I think that is fascinating to see. But there is the soot all over Egypt and then gets on the skin of not just man, but also animals as well in Egypt. And it then turns into boils and sores that are just, again, just makes your skin crawl. Verse 10. So they took soot from the kiln and stood before Pharaoh. And Moses threw it in the air, and it became boils breaking out in sores on man and beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils came upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians as well. So it just, for me, the big thing here is the fact that the magicians aren't even trying at this point. Yes, they were able, through dark arts, they were able to replicate the first plague, the second plague. They were able to replicate all of that or repeat all of it. But then, with the third plague, they were not able to. And ever since then, the fourth and the fifth plague, it's like they're not even trying. And I think that's really, really interesting. Well, here, finally, with the sixth plague, they're not saying anything yet, but they are showing by their actions. This is something that we've never seen before. This is not something that we can do with our ancient arts. And you would think, again, that would cause Pharaoh to go, oh, something is up here. Like, I really need to start listening to Moses and Aaron and therefore God. I really need to listen to these two that are the messengers for the God of the Hebrews. And yet, verse 12, but the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had spoken to Moses. The plagues are not done. There's still the plagues of the seventh, eighth, ninth, and 10th plagues to go. So the fact that this is not ending yet is just to show that those around Egypt at that time are still not getting it through that the God of the Hebrews is the only true God. And I think that's why you see the Lord hardening the heart of Pharaoh and Pharaoh not listening again. Now, it's really interesting when it comes to the Egyptian god or goddess behind this sixth plague. There are a couple that are interesting when it comes to healing, like you have Serapis, you have even an ancient, an actual historical person in ancient Egypt named Imhotep, which a lot of people will conclude is the ancient Egyptian father of medicine. And so I think that is interesting to look at. But for me, I think the big one that we're supposed to really lock into is the goddess Sekhmet. I think that is the one that we are supposed to think of when we think of this plague. And the goddess Sekhmet is really, really interesting when it comes to being connected to this plague. First off, her name actually means she who is powerful. And so you have this idea of God doing battle against someone who is named powerful, or she who is named powerful. I think that's really interesting to see. Sekhmet was also the goddess of war, vengeance. She was also the goddess of plagues and healing. And I think those last two things make it very, very clear that she is really supposed to be the one that's connected to this plague. One, because it's kind of ironic that it's a plague to combat the goddess of plagues. I think that's interesting. And then, second, you have her being the goddess of healing. And of course, God brings about these boils with just the soot of a kiln, and yet there is no healing from it. And so God is just saying, look, you trust in this goddess Sekhmet, she who is powerful. Well, guess what? I'm using plagues, the things that she is the goddess over, to humiliate, to absolutely humiliate the gods and goddesses of Egypt. But then you also have this idea that if the gods and goddesses of Egypt were real, and the fact that she, Sekhmet, is the goddess of healing, then where's the healing from these boils? Because it's only from soot from a kiln. So you would think it wouldn't be that hard to heal. And there's nothing. And I think what just a masterful move on God's part to bring this about. But then you have another thing that's interesting. She is the daughter of the sun god Ra, who we're going to get to with the ninth plague. Because he is one of the biggest gods of ancient Egypt. And so she had a very, very important role, not just as someone who would be protecting the gods and goddesses, but she was also protecting of pharaohs, but she, again, was involved very much in medicine as well. And yet she is put aside by the God of the Hebrews with the sixth plague of the boils. So really interesting things to see. Now, next time on Thursday, we're going to be looking at the seventh plague, which is hail, and just kind of taking a look at what that would have looked like, the size of the hail. But then there's also a very interesting thing in this passage that on the surface looks rather strange. And so we'll look at that on Thursday. But thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today as we looked at the plague of boils. And I will see you Thursday. Thanks.